So in this part, we are going to talk about version control, and that actually means keeping track of changes. And we look at questions around how not to worry about making changes to a project, what is version control, and also I touch just quickly upon Git and GitHub. And so we will have as an objective, so what are the problems with introducing changes to files? How can we make good file change descriptions? Why should we use or would we want to use version control systems? And very shortly, I will talk about semantic versioning. So I guess many of us can relate to what you can see depicted here in this comic. So you create let's say a manuscript, you call it final doc, and you hand it to your supervisor. And then it turns out it wasn't a final version. So it goes through several rounds of revisions and it gets a final revision 1, revision 2, revision whatever, tag added on. And at the end, you totally lost track what you've actually changed in all those different versions. So why do we need to make changes at all? So, well, that results from the fact that our projects are actually not static. So they evolve. And that also means that changes come in many different flavors. So you can add new files, you can add data entries to files, so manuscripts or methods need changing, data tables need reformatting, reorganizing, data itself needs reanalyzing, figures can be updated, you experiment with cleaning your data, you process it, you make visualizations from it, and then obviously you share and you co-edit data and text files, and all these things introduce changes. So that already brings us to our first exercise. And when you head over to the notebook, you should find statements and that, should reflect some issues you could have when introducing changes. And I would like you to read through them and then decide for yourself if you have encountered these issues yourself, and just mark it with +1 as we did before. And then I'll give you, let's say, a couple of minutes. So everyone had enough time to go through the questions? So just looking at the table already shows that there are some favorites, starting with I have 15 versions of that file. Which one do I use? Seems to be a classic. Same goes for I can't remake that figure. So it makes very obvious that many of us have encountered problems with versioning or version control or tracking changes, especially. Sorry to see that someone already has deleted part of data, part of their work. That happens, and that also shows that there are several different sort of issues or changes that can happen to files. For once, you can overwrite old content or lose files. You may introduce side effects. For example, renaming a file may break analysis pipelines. And also, if you introduce multiple changes to multiple files, you always have to remember that you actually had multiple files that need the same change. And also, if you work with other people, you need to collate changes from your collaborators. And I'm going back to sharing my screen, I think. So, and addressing those issues by tracking all those changes is then called version control. So version control decouples the process of making the changes from the actual physical change. So it identifies or it tags a collection of changes to files and then references them. So that allows you to potentially go back to a state before or after the change. And with version control, the file names do not reflect the version. So the information about versions and the changes are kept separate from the files. And you might say that already screams for automation. It might, and I'm coming back to that a little bit later, but just to say that it is possible to achieve version control manually. It needs a systematic approach, but it can be done. And how it can be done is what I would like to show you, what I would like to give you suggestions for. So one suggestion, if you do go for manual versioning is to add a file that's called changelog.txt. So you put that in your project subfolder and you make dated notes about changes in reverse chronological order. And yesterday we talked already about date formats. So ideally you start with the year, the month, the date. So you have it nicely sorted in chronological order. And you also add a description, as you can see here on the slide. So you have it dated and you add descriptions, and that hopefully helps you to keep track. Also, the second suggestion would be is to copy the entire project whenever a significant change has been made. And significant means one that materially affects the results. So you store that in a subfolder and you date it, and you also add a little note as it is described here. So for example, in this one, you have your project name and you have a folder called current. This is where your actual work is being done. And all the other folders in this, or subfolders in that folder, contain older versions. They are dated, they have a short label, so if there is need, you can go back to them. And I guess in that case, the ideal would be that the data or those project folder is mapped to an external storage, such as Dropbox, for example. So the take-home message would be that data is probably cheap, but your time is expensive, and even a terabyte of data hardly costs anything anymore. So to have an external hard drive where you copy your entire work, it seems like a waste, but it might save you a lot of time, and your time is probably what is more expensive than any storage space. Additionally, what we suggest for manual versioning would also be to keep all your changes small. If they are too large, tracking might become irrelevant. So for example, if you want to change data for a paper, and you have to change different type of data sets like the text, the analysis scripts, and the results, and you put that all in one change, then it's likely too large and doesn't allow you to distinguish between the single changes you have made. So similarly, having said, don't make it too large, also don't make it too small as not to have too many entries in your log. So as a rule of thumb, a good size for a single change is a group of edits that you might want to do or undo in one go. So that would, for example, be you change the abstract text in a manuscript, or you made changes to data for figure 1, or you exchanged figure 1. Keep it small, don't have it too small, but try to keep it as small as possible, that it still has a meaning. Also, and that sounds like a no-brainer, try to store each project in a folder that is mirrored off your actual working machine. Systems like Dropbox or Google Drive can already help, and then synchronize your folder daily. It might take a few minutes and it might be annoying, but that one time where your machine dies on you, it might be a lifesaver. So that is probably very good advice, and yeah, probably something you already have thought about. Also, if you collaborate, try to share your changes frequently so that you don't have changes in different places by different people, which then becomes a bit more complicated to merge at the end. So these are probably good advice for manual versioning. So that already brings us to the next exercise. And therefore, I'd like you to go back to the notepads, read through the same statements again, and mark the ones you think can be solved with manual version control. So by just looking at the list, there are issues that can be solved with manual version controls, and others that are probably harder to solve manually. But definitely, if you have several versions, you at least will know which one was the latest one. Hopefully that gives you an idea which one to use. Obviously, it can't tell you which one to use. If you're looking for something very specific, you probably would have to have that in the description of the change. If it breaks your code, you can at least go back to a version where your code was still working, obviously. And then there are a couple of statements that may or may not help. So I think it already gives you an idea that manual version control can solve a lot of things, but not everything, or can track a lot of changes, but not all of them. So coming maybe now to the most important message of this part. So how to actually make the changes so that they are valuable to you if you go for manual versioning. So how to document a change contains four suggestions that really should be included. And those are: a good entry always should have the date of the change, the author of the change, a list of all the affected files, and a short description of the change. So this is following best practice protocols. If you don't include anything else, these are the have-to things that must go into the documentation for your change. And I just mentioned description. So description could be pretty much anything you need it to be. It can be very detailed. It doesn't have to be. If it's only your own project, you probably know what you're talking about. The larger the project gets, and large can mean numbers of collaborators, file numbers, but also complexity of your project, the more detailed your description should be. Especially if you're exchanging information with collaborators, they might need a little bit more background information or motivation behind the change than you would do if it's only your own project. And also what you should keep in mind is that if multiple researchers are working on the same project, it's probably best to coordinate so that only one single person works on a specific file at any time. You might even want to consider if all the collaborators create their own changelog, and then you merge it maybe when you make the next backup, for example. So, but then at least you have your own, or for each contributor, you have a changelog, which is then easier to merge than a final version. So manual versioning is possible, but it requires a lot of self-discipline. And this is probably why you would want to have it a little bit more automated. But before we come to version control systems, I would like you to have a look at a changelog in action. And this is already kind of the bridge to the next part, the version control systems. What I would like you to look at are two examples in an online repository in Git, and we're coming back to Git in a little while. So in the notepad, you'll find two links to two changelogs. Have a look around. So they are on Git or GitHub. And what I would like you to explore is what makes them good changelogs, what you think could be improved. And when you go through it, also have a think, what would be difficult to replicate if it were in a manual version control? So what makes it good, what could be improved, and maybe also observe the four key items that we were just talking about. Just bringing on screen the first example. Can anyone tell me what you liked about it, or what is helpful on such a system? What you can also nicely see is that all log entries contain obviously author, because it's one GitHub place, but it also contains the date, which is quite important. Also, if you have text files, you can actually see the changes. Is there anything that you thought is not so good or could be improved? Exactly. So this is something to keep an eye on, that you actually describe well what you've changed. And also some of the entries could be definitely more detailed. Also, we were talking about sizes. If you have a look at the BOEM changelog, some of these pig, I think they're called pig entries, there are really, really many entries in one change. So maybe breaking it down into smaller packages also makes sense so that you don't change too many things at once. So keeping track of changes manually definitely can be done, but as we already see in the first example, it might be useful to have a version control system that keeps track of changes for you. So a version control system keeps track of the changes. It helps to version and also to merge your files and all that automatically. So it allows you also to decide which changes make up the next version, so-called commit, and they also keep the metadata about them. So the complete history of all the commits for a particular project, plus the metadata make up the repository, what we've already seen in the example. So there are a lot of benefits to have a control version system in place instead of doing it manually. So it doesn't require the user to back up the copies. A version control system just stores enough information to allow old versions of files to be recreated. It also doesn't rely on the user to choose sensible names, which can be a bit complicated sometimes. A version control system automatically timestamps to save the changes. And it also requires the user not to be disciplined about it, to have a change log and actually add the changes every single time into that change log, but it prompts them when a change is being made. And it also keeps 100% accurate record of what was actually changed, which might not be what the user thought they have changed. So that can be a valuable add-on as well. So, and instead of simply copying files to remote storage, a version control checks to see if that would override anyone else's work. And if there is a conflict, it prompts you and you can resolve the conflict that way. So a version control system is a snapshot of a project's files repository, and users modify their working copy of the project and then save the changes to a repository whenever they wish to make a permanent record or whenever they wish to share their work with colleagues. So it automatically records the change and by whom it was made and when it was made, along with the change itself. So it kind of follows the exact best practice protocol that we already talked about with manual versioning. And repositories obviously can be kept in sync across different devices, which is also helpful if you collaborate with people. And also if several people then have edited a file simultaneously, VCS detects collisions and then requires you to resolve conflicts. So that already brings us to another exercise, which is more of reading through the reasons. We talked about benefits. Now we're talking about reasons to use such a version control system. And obviously, that's also a personal choice. So have a read through the reasons that are in the notepad, and then decide for yourself which of these reasons are the most important for you. And therefore, by that, we might get an idea of what most important is for the group. It seems like you all would use it for collaboration the most. That is very good. So obviously that is a strong benefit of a version control system, that you can collaborate easier. You also have a backup online in the online repository, which seems to be one of the stronger reasons for you to use version control systems. And also the sort of travel back in time aspect seems to be a bit more why you would go for an online or a version control system instead of doing it manually. a version control system has so many benefits that even if you're not really into programming and you haven't tried it yet, and you're not really programming, going for a version control system actually has benefits, and using Git or GitHub can have a very, very steep learning curve, even for someone who has never coded or never tried anything. And whoever does any form of scientific computing, may be using Python or R or MATLAB or Bash script, it is probably a must for you to learn Git or GitHub. And I just try to find the right screen again. So you don't have to understand it in the very first time you're using it. It is very worth learning it. Unfortunately, we don't have the time to go through it, but I think Julia pasted the links to tutorials and to crash courses for Git and GitHub into the notepad. So if you want to give it a go, please do so. Maybe try it using it in parallel, use your manual versioning, and then move on to automatic, or a system that automatically keeps track of your changes. So last but not least, and we're doing very good in time, I just want to quickly touch upon semantic versioning. So we have mentioned before that we recommend to record small changes. And sometimes it is important to record changes of a particular point in time, let's say a set of changes that have a logical meaning. And let's say for manuscript submission, we all have made these folders with submission and revision 1 and revision 2 and final. So that always depicts one specific point in time. And in software engineering terminology, such an official point in time is called a release. And sometimes it is not desirable or not possible to use the latest version, the latest release of a software, especially if you're using software libraries. You may not always want to have the latest version because maybe your hardware or software is not able to deal with an entire update. So semantic versioning is one way to let you know exactly which version you are using, to be able to choose all the components that are able to handle that version. And otherwise, you might end in something that's called dependency hell, because modern software often uses external software libraries. And then if you use the latest version, it might have downstream effects and you're not able to run a software. So semantic versioning is a pretty easy code to understand. So it is a three component number, where the leftmost number denotes a major version. That means there are breaking changes. So these changes will affect other software that interacts with it. And for example, it might change input or output files so that the existing files cannot be read anymore, or program functions are being renamed, or call parameters are being changed. So that might break the software you have been using, or you won't be able to use it anymore. So a minor version, so the middle number, denotes a new functionality. So whenever you increase the minor version, you communicate that the software still can be exactly used as the old version was, but it has new features. So that can, for example, be a plot library that now plots in colors instead of just black and white, or that your results are now downloadable in Excel and as a CSV file instead of just CSV. So the last number gives you the patch version, and that are usually bug fixes or security updates. They don't have any functionality changes and only have very minor changes included. So that means if you upgrade from, let's say, 2.6.8 to 0.9, it's only a bug fix. And for your work, that means it's only small edits or small corrections. If you upgrade or if you do a minor change to 2.7, it would add new functionality. That for your work could mean you add new data or new details. An update to 3.0.0 would make it's a huge change. It might break existing APIs, and for your work that means probably rewrites or reformatting or proper renaming. You see the dots or full stops in between. That assures lexically sorting. So the major version will dominate over a minor version, will dominate over a patch number. And also that allows a dependency software to automatically choose the most recent version of a library, or automatically update libraries to a patched version, but it can still avoid problems with changing to a new major release, which then might break your pipeline. So semantic versioning is more often used for software. It can be used for datasets or collaborative documents, and it sort of communicates the severity of changes. So if you do use it for datasets or manuscript, and let's say the last manuscript you send around was 2.1.5, and the next one you get is 2.1.10, then it's probably only minor changes. If the next version of the manuscript is a 3.0.10, then you definitely will have to look at this, because then this is a major or includes major changes. But mostly for data and documents, major and minor numbers without patch numbers are being used. And a very easy example for that could be what you see here on this slide, is going through from 1.91.12 to all the way through different iterations, different minor and major corrections, to a version 3.0.923, which had a lot of bug fixes, I would say. So this would be an example of semantic versioning for software. So that is me being at the end of this already. All that's left for you is to complete the quiz that also is in the notepad now, around semantic versioning. And I'll give you a few minutes, and then we can have a look at the answers. And with one more final question, we will be done then. I think there are all correct answers, except for the question number 2, where you use the library FAIR 2.3.1 to automatically upload your data after analysis. Then you found out that there is available a new version of the library, 0.4.3.1. Which situation is the most probable? I've got 2 different answers here. So that's a major change from 0.2.31 to 4.31. B is the correct answer. That's it. So it just doubling the number doesn't mean it's twice as fast. What do you think? What does the group think? How does semantic versioning help to be fair? I mean, haven't talked about fair for quite a while now. So why do you think semantic versioning could be helping in being fair? Release version help to be findable, and it also achieves interoperability. It's what you said, finding the right version to exchange your data or to come to the same results. Therefore, it helps with reproducibility, with reuse. So that was me being done. That is also pretty much day 3.